Mythic Plus is right around the corner, so today we're diving into the ins and outs of M+. We're talking portal rooms, dungeons, dungeon buffs, timers, affixes, gear rewards, both at the end of dungeon and vault rewards, upgrade costs, and Enchanted Crest. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. First, let's talk about the Season 1 dungeons we're getting. New dungeons coming in from the War Within consist of Arakara, City of Echoes, City of Threads, the Stone Vault, and the Dawnbreaker. I personally like most of these dungeons. Stone Vault's tough but fun, City of Threads has some nice buffs, and Dawnbreaker, which I hated, receives some changes, and at first I think people will not like it, but once you have a route, it gets better, I promise. Returning from the previous X-Packs, we have Mist of Turn of Scythe, Love a Good Maze, Necrotic Wake, Siege of Moralis, and Grim Batol. These dungeons have probably had better reworks than other dungeons being adapted to current M+, and that's mostly because most of them have already been a Mythic Plus dungeon, so that's a solid returning list. Now, with these old dungeons being scattered all over Azeroth, we need to know how to get there, and it's quite easy. There is a portal room in Dorn next to the upgrade vendor with portals to all the Season 1 dungeons from previous X-Packs. Now, I want to talk about timers because in Dragonflight, the timers were fairly forgiving, but now in the War Within, they've gotten tighter. And with specific affixes, they can be really tight with only a few deaths. So let's run through the timers for each dungeon. Stone Vault's timer is sitting at 33 minutes, which isn't too bad, but Stone Vault has some tough bosses that can lock up a pug group and really cut it close. Dawnbreaker is a 30-minute timer. After the changes, I think it's a reasonable timer. If you have decent pathing, the dungeon is fairly quick, but a few butt pulls which can happen easily, and you'll find yourself sweating. City of Threads has a 35-minute timer, and it's the second longest timer you have in a dungeon, and it's gotta be because of all the RP. This dungeon isn't bad from boss to boss, but the RP can drag and may be a problem for groups if you get stuck waiting for pats to slowly walk by you because man, they move slow. Arakara has a 30-minute timer, tied with Dawnbreaker for the shortest timer, and this one can get tight. Luckily, if you do wipe after the first boss, you have a bat appear that you can click on and he will fly you to your checkpoint, making runbacks a bit quicker. Mist of Turn of Scythe is next with another 30-minute timer, and when this was reduced, it became a lot tougher to finish in time. If you don't have access to the skips that can be done, you end up pulling some really tough packs that can burn the clock, and getting stuck in the maze can make it even worse. Necrotic Wake has a 32-minute timer. I believe it was reduced from 35, don't quote me. This is probably the only dungeon in Season 1 that you can have multiple big pulls throughout, and combining that with the weapons and the fact that there is no trash between the second and last boss, the timer felt pretty good in beta. Siege of Moralis has a 34-minute timer, and this one always felt tough in the beta. Granted, we were under geared, but it's a fairly long dungeon, and that 34-minute timer can creep up quick. Lastly, we've got Grim Batol with a 36-minute timer, the longest of them all, and it is very welcome in this dungeon. They've got some really tough packs throughout that have some strong damage directed randomly at several targets at once, so a couple deaths is likely to happen, and having the 36-minute timer is needed. Right, now I know when you heard Mist of Turn of Scythe, you immediately thought of fence skips, acorn unlocks, and class buffs in dungeons, so let's talk about the buffs in each dungeon and how to get them. Starting with Mist, we have Overgrown Roots and Depleted Anima Seeds, the acorns that unlock checkpoints after certain bosses. Originally, back in Shadowlands, you needed to be a specific covenant or race to use any of these, but in the War Within, they reported a change to allow all classes to use the acorn to unlock checkpoints. However, opening the Overgrown Roots are still only for Night Elves, Taurens, Regular and High Mountain, Druid, and Herbalist. So it's always nice to have one of those in the group to open the initial gate to skip the first pack, and the second gate to get the mushroom buff before the first boss. City of Threads has quite a nice buff in there for rogues, priests, and engineers. There are shadecasters throughout the dungeons that look like projections of Nerubians, which you can activate to receive stolen power, a 15% increase to damage and healing, as well as a 50% increase to movement speed. Next in the city dungeons is City of Echoes, more commonly referred to as Arakara. Arakara has Discordian attendants spread out throughout the dungeon. They're dead Nerubians that if you interact with them and have a tailoring skill of at least 25, you can get an on-use ability called Silk Thread. Silk Thread can be used on a mob to stun it for 10 seconds, which is a pretty hefty stun in a world of casting mobs. Moving on to Stone Vault. Stone Vault probably has the best buff in a dungeon, and it is for warriors, dwarves, and blacksmiths. There are anvils scattered throughout the dungeons that when interacted with grant a whopping 10% burst to the party. Burst is less damage taken and more damage done, which is fantastic for Mythic Plus dungeons. Lastly, we've got Necrotic Wake and its weapons. If you played Shadowlands, I'm sure you're very familiar with these weapons. They were very impactful back in the day. In the War Within, they still have some nice uses, although they are not as strong. This is the only dungeon that doesn't require any specific class or race to use the weapons. First weapon is Discharge Anima. It's a small blue floating orb you can pick up and you'll gain an on-use ability that when used, it will deal arcane damage to all nearby enemies and interrupt spells every 1 second for 8 seconds. This is very good with the changes to mobs that we've recently got. Second weapon is Bloody Javelin. This was one rogues loved because it dealt a ton of damage and with the Mark of the Master Assassin legendary, always crit for them. Unfortunately, the damage has been taken down a bit in the War Within. Bloody Javelin inflicts damage to all enemies it passes through and an additional damage every 2 seconds for 16 seconds. Enemies take 20% increased damage for 16 seconds. Very good for boss fights in your Lust window to really burn it down. Next, Forgotten Forge Hammer deals damage and stuns for 8 seconds. Simple and a nice additional long stun. Lastly, we have Discarded Shield. Very good in dealing with the big pulls you can do in this dungeon, with the shield reducing damage taken by 50% for all allies within 8 yards for 6 seconds. Make sure if you're a caster or a range, you tuck into melee when using this to make sure you are granted the damage reduction. That's it for dungeon buffs. You can get some great value from these and turn some difficult packs into easy ones with the right buffs. On the opposite side of buffs, each Mythic Plus dungeon comes with affixes, changing weekly and as your key level rises until plus 12s where it's a bit more stagnant as to what you have to deal with. These affixes have done a complete 180 from Dragonflight, and Blizzard has leaned into the Kiss Curse style that they were previously against. Most of these affixes have been great changes, with a few of them I'm personally not a fan of, but the changes overall a very good change for Mythic Plus, so let's get into them. Affixes now begin at level 2, so the first Mythic Plus you go into will have one of these 4 affixes. This season they are all focused on a bargain with xal'atath. First off, we've got xal'atath's Bargain Ascendant. About every minute, xal'atath will show up and summon a total of 10 orbs that cast Cosmic Ascension. If these orbs complete their cast, they will buff the mobs with haste and movement speed per orb that finishes the cast. Players can stop the cast through interrupting, displacing, crowd controlling, or purging them, and they will receive 2% movement speed and 2% haste per orb they stop. So this will grant them a total of 20% movement speed and 20% haste every time she does this. So you can get about 20% haste every minute while this affix is up. This is my favorite of the affixes. It's very similar to the orbs on Raszageth. They drop right around you. AoE stuns, fears, interrupts can easily shatter these orbs. Almost every class, if not every class, has a way to take out a handful of these, and that's always good for Mythic Plus. Plus you get 20% haste from clearing them, so players are rewarded for doing the affix. xal'atath's Bargain, Voidbound. While in combat, xal'atath summons a Void Emissary to empower nearby enemies with Dark Prayer. For any mob that has this cast on them, it will reduce their damage taken by 10% every 3 seconds, and it stacks. Upon defeating the Void Emissary, players get 20% increased cooldown rate and 10% critical strike chance for 20 seconds. Another solid affix. The mob spawns and follows whoever has threat, usually the tank, and players cleave it down or can focus it down fairly quickly and are granted 20% faster cooldowns and 10% crit. I really liked how they've given rewards in different stats, allowing players who don't benefit from haste to have some good buffs. xal'atath's Bargain, Oblivion. While in combat, xal'atath manifests crystals from the void that can be absorbed by enemies or players. Players that absorb these crystals will gain Void Essence, which grants 2% mastery and 1% leech per crystal. If the crystals hit the mobs will gain 10% damage reduction, again per crystal, meaning if all of them hit the mob, he will have 100% damage reduction. This has been my least favorite affix so far. These orbs spawn a decent distance away from the mob and float in towards them. If you miss them, the mob gains a 10% damage reduction, which can stack to 100% damage reduction, which can be devastating on a boss or a tough pack. Grabbing them as they float in isn't the hard part. The hard part is when you have a lot of ground clutter or frontals or AoE effects that cause you to simply not be able to get the orb coming in, and then you are punished. It's the one affix to me that can just have times where there's nothing you can do about it. However, if you do get them, you get a nice chunk of mastery and leech, 20% and 10% respectively. Again, giving different stats for different classes is really cool, and I'm glad they started doing it. xal'atath's Bargain, Devour. Periodically, xal'atath will cast a Void Rift Absorb Shield on all 5 players that can be removed by either healing it or dispelling it using any type of dispel. Failure to remove the shield will heal mobs for 10% of their health, and removing a shield grants a stack of Lingering Void, which grants players 2% max health and 4% critical strike, stacking per person who is dispelled or healed. This is basically Afflicted, but for every player. You have a healing absorb that is put on you that is a big chunk of your health, and you can heal through it or you can dispel it, with dispel being the much easier option, but also can be tough if you only have 1 or 2 dispels in a group. Thankfully, most classes have a way to take care of themselves with Remove Curse, Cleanse, or Detox. Those who can take care of themselves should clear themselves as soon as possible, as ignoring it will heal the mobs. On the flip side, if you clear yourself or are cleared, you get 2% max health and 4% crit. That stacks up, so when the full party does it, you receive 10% max health and 20% crit. So make sure you are clearing yourself and helping clear others if you can. Alright, I know it's a lot of affixes for just a +2, but again, you only deal with 1 at a time, and for the most part, they are easy to do, with really nice rewards for doing them, so W Blizz for the affix change. Next, we are at the +4 range, and +4 is a simple one, Tyrannical or Fortified. Each week, you'll have one or the other at +4, with Tyrannical increasing dungeon boss health by 30% and their damage by 15%, while Fortified increases non-boss enemies' health by 20% and their damage by 20%. They rotate, will not be the same consecutively, so you will always have Tyran, then Fort, then Tyran, then Fort, and so on. Now for the +7 affix, and this is where it heats up a little bit, Challenger's Peril. Challenger's Peril causes 15 seconds to be subtracted from your timer per death instead of the 5 seconds we had previously. This makes dying much more punishing in groups, 3 times more punishing. Dying now with already tight timers can really put the clamps on you, and with the wipe taking a whole minute off your timer rather than 20 seconds, make sure you're using defensives and not standing and stuff. Okay, now we're at +10 and we've got Tyrannical and Fortified again, except instead of rotating one or the other, you have them both at the same time. Sounds fun, right? This actually isn't as bad as it sounds. Fortified, I think, is a good affix. It allows you to burn CDs more frequently due to packs lasting longer, and usually allows you to time your CD use leading up to a boss much easier. Tyrannical, on the other hand, is tyrannical. Long boss fights with a lot of damage, it can be pretty tough to get through quickly. Now, I think it's a good time to mention that these are not individual affixes per key level, they are stacking, leading up to the next key level, 12. So at +10, you will have xal'atath's Bargain, one of those 4 buffs we talked about earlier, Tyrannical and Fortified, and Challenger's Peril. All of these stacking up can make for a difficult dungeon, but the reward from xal'atath's Bargain does help a lot. Lastly, we have +12s, Tyrannical, Fortified, Challenger's Peril, and no more bargaining with xal'atath. Instead, we have xal'atath's Guile. This increases the health and damage of enemies in the dungeon by 20% on top of Tyran and Fort. You don't really need to deal with any more affixes now as far as having to dispel or CC or kill a prio mob. Instead, the overall dungeon becomes much harder from start to finish. This is going to be quite a jump from 11s, but Blizzard's idea behind it, I think it was a good idea too, was as high key pushers continue to push this key, they are now dealing with a flat difficulty increase to every dungeon with no variance. This will make pushing higher keys a bit easier because it eliminates push weeks and instead makes every week viable to push keys up at a high level. That does not mean these dungeons will be easy by any means. It just means there's less variance and you can strategize a bit better. Affixes down, now let's talk about rewards from dungeons. We'll cover end of dungeon eye level rewards and Great Vault eye level rewards. And this can get a little wordy with me throwing a lot of numbers at you. So I'm gonna have a chart on the screen to make it easier to follow along with what I'm saying. +2s and 3s will give you a champion track 1 out of 8 597 eye level item at the end of the dungeon, but they differ in Great Vault rewards. +2s will give you a 4 out of 8 on the champion track, a 606 eye level item from the vault, while 3s will give you a 1 out of 6 on the hero track 610 eye level item from your Great Vault. 4s will grant a 600 eye level item 2 out of 8 on the champion track at the end of your dungeon, and a 610 eye level item 1 out of 6 on the hero track from the vault. So the same vault reward as 3s, but a higher end of dungeon reward. +5s will give you a champion 3 out of 8 603 item at the end of the dungeon, and a hero track 2 out of 6 613 eye level item from vault. +6s will give you a champion track 4 out of 8 606 eye level item from end of dungeon, and a hero track 2 out of 6 613 eye level item from vault. So again, the same vault reward as a 5, but with a higher end of dungeon item. Plus 7s give a hero track 1 out of 6, 610 eye level item from end of dungeons, and a hero track 3 out of 6, 616 eye level item from vault. Plus 8s give a hero track 1 out of 6, 610 eye level item from the end of dungeon, and a hero track 4 out of 6, 619 eye level item from vault. So we're starting to go up a little bit in rewards on both ends and moving into the higher tracks. Plus 9s will give you a hero track 2 out of 6, 613 eye level item from the end of dungeon, and a hero track 4 out of 6, 619 eye level from vault. Again, the same as your previous plus 8, but a different end of dungeon reward. And lastly, plus 10s give a hero track 2 out of 6, 613 eye level item from end of dungeon, and a myth track 1 out of 6, 623 eye level item from vault. Now I know that's a ton of numbers thrown around in hero tracks and champion tracks, and what's it all mean? Well, in the War Within, it's the upgrade system. Very similar to Dragonflight, with each item having a max level it can be upgraded to within its track. So let's break down that upgrade process in each track. Each piece of gear can be upgraded with 15 crests and a varying amount of flight stones. The level of each gear will dictate the type of crest you need to upgrade it. There are 4 different crests in the War Within, so let's tackle that first. First, you have Weathered Harbinger Crest, something a lot of us are familiar with, as these were the main ones we got in the first week of the X-Pack. These come from World Quest, Treasures, Delves level 1 to 5, Heroic Dungeons, and LFR. These are used to upgrade veteran gear from 584 to 593. Next, we have Carved Harbinger Crest. These drop from weekly world events, world bosses, Delves level 6 to 7, Mythic dungeons, Mythic plus dungeons up to 3, and normal difficulty raid bosses. These are used to upgrade veteran gear from 593 to 606, and champion gear from 597 to 606. On to Ruined Harbinger Crests, which drop from Mythic plus from 4 to 8, Heroic raid bosses, and Delves from 8 to 11. These are used to upgrade champion gear from 606 to 619 and hero gear from 610 to 619. Lastly, we have Gilded Harbinger Crest, which drop from Mythic dungeons plus 9 and up, and Mythic raid bosses. These are used to upgrade hero gear from 619 to 626 and Mythic track gear from 623 to 639. Do we see a pattern there? Each crest will typically give the first half of upgrades, while the next level up crest finishes the previous track and does the first half of the next track. Weathered Harbinger Crest upgraded veterans from 1 out of 8 to 4 out of 8. Then Carved upgraded that veteran track from 4 out of 8 to 8 out of 8, as well as starting the champion track and being able to upgrade the champion track from 1 out of 8 to 4 out of 8. Next crest does champion 4 out of 8 to 8 out of 8, and hero 1 out of 6 to 4 out of 6. Gilded takes hero from 4 out of 6 to 6 out of 6, and Mythic track gear from start to finish 1 out of 6 to 6 out of 6. Now, something to note is for any item slot, once you obtain a certain eye level, any upgrades you do after will come with discounts up to that item's eye level. Valorstone discounts are warband wide, whereas the Harbinger Crest discount is not warband wide, so it's only on your individual character. Now, this so far has been that you don't need any crest at all to upgrade a piece to a previously reached eye level. So if you upgrade a piece of champion gear to its max and then get a piece of hero gear at 1 out of 6, you should be able to upgrade to 4 out of 6 with only Valor Stones. Now that might change as we go up in Mythic Plus because we haven't seen that yet, so we're not sure, but that could change. But for right now, that's how it's been in the current system. All right, that was a lot of crest and upgrade info thrown at you at once. We've got one more piece of crest info to cover, and that is Enchanted Crest. Enchanted Crests are what you need to craft higher eye level item gear. Now there's only 3 Enchanted Crests in the game. It's Enchanted Weathered, Enchanted Rune, and Enchanted Gilded Harbinger Crest. Each one of them has a little bit of a process to create, and that's what I want to explain here. You need 30 Weathered Harbinger Crest to purchase a Nascent Weathered Harbinger Crest, which is then used to make an Enchanted Weathered Harbinger Crest, which is then used to craft an item from 577 to 590 eye level. Now I know it's a bit convoluted, but at least the process doesn't change for any other Enchanted Crest, just the mats you need. So for the Enchanted Ruined Harbinger Crest, you need 45 Ruined Harbinger Crest to purchase a Nascent Ruined Harbinger Crest, which again is used to make an Enchanted Ruined Harbinger Crest, which can be used to craft gear from 606 to 619. And lastly, for Gilded, you need 90 Gilded Harbinger Crest to purchase a Nascent Gilded Harbinger Crest. Again, it's very repetitive. and you use that Nascent Gilded Harbinger Crest to make an Enchanted Gilded Harbinger Crest, which you can use to craft 623 to 636 eye level items. Also, as a reminder, you do need a Spark of Omen for each item crafted, sometimes 2 depending on two-handers and staffs. So these items cannot be crafted with Enchanted Crest alone. It is just used to increase the eye level of the item you're making. And that's it, guys. That's all I wanted to talk about. We covered dungeons, portals, timers, affixes, gear, upgrades, crest, Enchanted Crest, and I hope that you guys are ready for Mythic Plus because it is right around the corner. So until next time, guys, have fun out there.